My name is not important, but my story is. This is a story I have wanted to tell for a very long time. For years, it has been a heavy burden on my heart, a shadow that has followed me through every waking moment and haunted my dreams. It is a tale of survival of a battle fought not on a physical battlefield but in the sterile, intimidating offices of a powerful government agency and the cold, unforgiving halls of justice. After 41 long and grueling months entangled in the Nigerian legal system, and after spending a fortune on legal fees that could have built a future, I am finally ready to speak. The silence has been deafening, a prison of its own making, but today, I break free from its chains. I have finally found the courage to share my ordeal with you, a journey through the labyrinthine corridors of the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, more commonly and fearfully known as the EFCC. The decision to make this public has not been an easy one. There were countless nights I would sit down ready to pour my heart out only to be paralyzed by a wave of fear and anxiety. The memories are still so raw, so vivid, that reliving them feels like reopening a wound that has barely begun to heal. The trauma of those years is etched into my very being, a constant reminder of how quickly a life can be turned upside down. But I have come to realize that my silence serves no one, least of all myself. It only perpetuates the very system that nearly broke me. Sharing this story is not just an act of personal catharsis, it is an act of defiance, a refusal to let my experience be buried and forgotten. It is a necessary step towards healing, not just for me but hopefully for a society that desperately needs to confront the monsters it has created. This narrative is not born from a desire for vengeance or pity. My aim is far greater than personal retribution. I want to start a conversation, a national dialogue about this immensely powerful government agency that operates with what seems like unchecked authority. The EFCC was established with a noble mission to combat financial crimes and corruption which have plagued our nation for decades. However, power, when left without accountability, has a tendency to corrupt. It can transform an institution meant to be a shield for the people into a sword wielded against them. My story is a testament to this dangerous transformation, a cautionary tale of what happens when the guardians of justice become the purveyors of injustice. It is a plea for us to look closer, to ask the difficult questions, and to demand transparency from those who hold our fates in their hands. The events I'm about to recount are not from a movie script or a work of fiction. They are my lived reality, a true story that unfolded over 3.5 years of my life. Every detail, every emotion, every moment of despair and flicker of hope is etched into my memory. This is the story of how a young entrepreneur's dream was nearly extinguished by the very system designed to protect it. It is about the shock of an early morning phone call that changed everything, the terror of being treated like a hardened criminal, and the long, arduous fight for my name and my freedom. I invite you to walk this path with me, to understand the human cost of institutional overreach, and to join me in calling for a future where no one has to endure what I went through. My primary motivation for sharing this harrowing experience is to spark a critical conversation about the EFCC. This agency, vested with immense power to investigate and prosecute financial crimes, has become a force to be reckoned with in Nigeria. While its mandate is crucial for the health of our nation, its methods and the apparent lack of oversight are becoming increasingly alarming. There is a growing concern that the EFCC is beginning to operate like a rogue unit, reminiscent of the notorious Special Anti-Robbery Squad, a police unit we, the Nigerian youth, fought so hard to disband just a few years ago. The parallels are chilling: the intimidation, the presumption of guilt, the abuse of power, and the devastating impact on innocent lives. We cannot allow history to repeat itself, to watch another government body meant to protect us devolve into an instrument of oppression and fear. The #EndSARS movement was a powerful testament to the collective will of the people demanding accountability from law enforcement. It was a fight for our fundamental human rights, for the right to live without fear of those sworn to protect us. That same spirit of vigilance must now be directed towards institutions like the EFCC. When an agency can freeze a citizen's bank accounts, order their arrest, and detain them without presenting concrete evidence of a crime, we must question the checks and balances in place. Is there a government body effectively overseeing their operations? Are their investigative processes transparent and just? My story will lay bare the terrifying reality of what can happen when these questions are not answered, when an agency is allowed to become the judge, jury, and executioner, all before a case even reaches a courtroom. We must collectively look towards establishing robust government oversight for the EFCC. This is not an attack on the institution itself or its well-meaning officers, but a call for reform to strengthen it and ensure it adheres to the principles of justice and the rule of law. Oversight would mean clear guidelines, accountability for misconduct, and a system that protects citizens from arbitrary and malicious investigations. It would mean that an individual's success is not automatically treated as a sign of criminal activity. My ordeal began not with any evidence of wrongdoing, but with suspicion fueled by the amount of money in my accounts. Money I had earned legitimately through hard work and innovation. This crime of being a successful young Nigerian became the basis for a nightmare that consumed years of my life. This is a call to action for our lawmakers, civil society organizations, and every Nigerian citizen who believes in justice. We need to demand a system where power is balanced with responsibility. We must advocate for a framework that allows the EFCC to effectively fight corruption without trampling on the rights of the innocent. Let my story be a catalyst for this change. Let it serve as a reminder that the price of freedom is eternal vigilance, and that we must remain vigilant not only against criminals, but also against the potential for tyranny within our own government institutions. The fight for a just society is ongoing, and this is a crucial battle we cannot afford to lose. The future of our democracy and the safety of our citizens depend on it. Before the storm, there was a season of hope and relentless hard work. To understand the full weight of what was taken from me, you must first understand what I was building. My story does not begin in a courtroom or a detention cell. It begins on a university campus filled with the boundless energy and ambition of youth. In my final year at the university, I embarked on my first real entrepreneurial venture. A very good friend, someone who saw potential in my ideas and trusted me implicitly, invested in our shared dream. Together, we launched a restaurant business, not just to make money but to redefine the food industry within our university community. We were young, driven, and perhaps a little naive, but we were determined to make our mark. Our concept was simple, yet revolutionary for our campus at the time: a food delivery service. In an era before the proliferation of delivery apps, we were pioneers. With the limited resources we had, we built an operation from the ground up. The initial days were a whirlwind of excitement and activity. The business was taking its toll on me, no doubt. My life became a cycle of lectures, cooking, packaging, and coordinating deliveries. I was working around the clock, fueled by caffeine and pure adrenaline. Sleep was a luxury I could rarely afford, but I loved every single moment of it. There was an immense satisfaction in building something from scratch, in seeing an idea come to life and serve our community. It was more than a business, it was my passion project. However, passion alone does not pay the bills. The sad and frustrating truth was that despite all our hard work and the popularity of our service, we were not making any real money. The operational costs were high, and our profit margins were razor thin. While I was pouring my sweat and soul into the business, my friend, the investor, seemed to be doing just fine financially. He was a constant source of support, often bankrolling our operations and my personal expenses when things got tight. His financial stability was a stark contrast to my own struggles. It was a frustrating and humbling reality. I was the one running the show, yet I was barely surviving. This disparity gnawed at me, planting a seed of curiosity that would eventually change the course of my life. One day, overwhelmed by the financial pressure and the exhaustion, I sat myself down for a moment of honest reflection. I had to figure out what my friend was doing differently. I needed to learn his secret to financial success. It was during this pivotal conversation that he introduced me to a world I knew very little about: YouTube. He explained how he was creating content, building an audience, and monetizing his channel. A light bulb went on in my head. This was it, a potential path out of my financial struggles, a new frontier to conquer. Little did I know that this new path, which promised freedom and prosperity, would ultimately lead me to the darkest chapter of my life, a confrontation with a force more powerful and destructive than I could have ever imagined. My introduction to YouTube was not a grand epiphany but a desperate search for a lifeline. My restaurant business, though a source of immense pride, was a financial drain, and the pressure was mounting. So, when my friend revealed that his income stream flowed from this global video platform, I was immediately captivated. He made it look so effortless, so achievable. Full of renewed hope and a sense of excitement I hadn't felt in months, I decided to dive in headfirst. I created my very first YouTube channel, envisioning a future where my creativity would finally translate into financial stability. The possibilities seemed endless, and I imagined myself quickly mastering this new domain, just as I had tried to master the campus food delivery market. I was ready for the next chapter. However, the reality of being a content creator hit me like a cold wave. The moment I opened the creator dashboard, I was overwhelmed. The platform was a complex ecosystem of analytics, algorithms, and unspoken rules. Everything felt alien and intimidating. I had no idea how to craft a compelling story, how to hold an audience's attention, or even the basic technical skills required. The camera felt like an accusatory eye, and the editing software was a maze of timelines and effects that I couldn't navigate. I would spend hours staring at a blank screen, my mind devoid of ideas, the initial rush of enthusiasm slowly fizzling out into a puddle of self-doubt and frustration. It was a humbling and deeply discouraging experience. My first few attempts at creating videos were clumsy and amateurish. I would record something, watch it back, and cringe at the poor quality, the awkward delivery, and the lack of a clear narrative. The vision I had in my head was a world away from the pathetic reality on my screen. After just a few days of wrestling with this new and unforgiving medium, I felt defeated. The mountain seemed too high to climb, and my motivation plummeted. I quit. I told myself it wasn't for me, that I should stick to what I knew, even if it wasn't profitable. I closed the laptop and tried to push the entire YouTube dream out of my mind, chalking it up as another failed experiment. But reality, especially the financial kind, has a way of being brutally persistent. The hunger, both literal and metaphorical, brought me back. The restaurant was still struggling, and my bank account was still depressingly empty. The allure of the potential income my friend was earning was a powerful magnet that pulled me back towards the very thing that had just defeated me. The brief hiatus gave me time to think. I realized my initial approach was flawed. I had tried to reinvent the wheel without even understanding how it worked. This time I knew I had to be smarter. I had to swallow my pride, set aside my ego, and approach it with a new strategy. One born not of invention, but of observation. Humbled by failure, I returned to YouTube with a new approach. Learn by copying. I studied my friend's channel obsessively, his storytelling, editing, even his thumbnails and titles. I replicated his formula, tweaking it just enough to make it my own. The results were instant. My channel exploded. Views, likes, subscribers, all skyrocketing. Ironically, my most imitated work became my most successful, while my original ideas had flopped. That old channel is now a relic, a reminder that sometimes imitation is the fastest path to mastery. Success on YouTube changed everything. Money worries vanished, and I bought my first car, then invested in property. I married my secondary school sweetheart, and together we built a new life. We launched a supermarket, blending my online income with a solid, traditional business. The supermarket thrived and our partnership deepened. Life felt like a fairy tale. Success, love, and ambition all coming together. But as we celebrated, we had no idea that trouble was quietly approaching. With financial security, I craved impact, not just income. I founded BTV, a media brand built with friends aiming to tell powerful stories and spark conversation. Despite our passion, we struggled to stand out. We needed a bold move, something to put BTV on the map. That's when the 1 million Naira challenge was born, a public debate with a life-changing prize. I was convinced this would launch BTV into the spotlight. The challenge was both a marketing masterstroke and a way to give back. We invited the public to debate big issues with 1 million Naira for the winner. The response was overwhelming. Applications flooded in, and BTV was suddenly everywhere. I felt proud, believing we were empowering voices and building community, but our success drew attention. The kind I never expected. My grand gesture would soon become the catalyst for a nightmare I couldn't imagine. On March 8, 2019, my phone rang at 8 a.m. A call from my bank. Groggy, I answered, expecting routine business. Instead, I was told the EFCC had frozen all my accounts and ordered my arrest if I entered any branch. Shocked, I woke my wife and tried to explain the unthinkable. We had just started building our dream home with a major payment due that day. Suddenly, I was locked out of my own life. Everything I'd built, frozen in an instant. That call marked the beginning of a 3-year ordeal I never saw coming. The initial shock quickly gave way to a frantic surge of adrenaline. I couldn't just sit there, I had to do something. My first instinct was to fight back, to confront this faceless accuser. I immediately placed a call to my lawyer, the first one I had ever retained, and told him I was on my way. When I arrived at his office, my mind was a chaotic storm of fear and indignation. I recounted the conversation with the bank, every word, every chilling detail. He listened patiently, his own expression hardening with anger as I spoke. When I finished, he looked at me and asked a simple question that cut through my panic. "What do you want to do?" My answer was immediate and defiant. I told him I wanted to go to the EFCC's office that very day and find out who gave that order. I was not going to run from a fight, especially when I knew deep in my bones that I had done nothing wrong. My lawyer, however, was more cautious. He was a seasoned professional who understood the treacherous landscape of Nigerian bureaucracy and law enforcement. He strongly advised against my impulsive plan. He pointed out that it was a Friday, and storming into their office late in the day was a recipe for disaster. The last thing he wanted was for me to get caught in their system over the weekend, which would almost certainly mean spending at least one night in their custody. But I was fueled by a righteous anger, a stubborn belief that the truth would protect me. I couldn't bear the thought of waiting. I didn't listen to his counsel. Convinced I could clear this up, I went home, not to rest, but to prepare for battle. I printed out every payment slip from Google AdSense, gathered all my business registration documents, and prepared a file to prove my legitimacy. Still seeking validation for my plan, I decided to get a second opinion. I went to see another lawyer, a woman highly recommended by a family friend. After I laid out my case and my intention to go to the EFCC immediately, she echoed the same advice as my first lawyer. She too insisted that we wait and approach them officially on Monday morning. She wanted to handle it formally, to ensure all legal protocols were followed, protecting me from any missteps. After listening to the same advice from two different legal experts, a sliver of reason finally broke through my anger. I reluctantly agreed to follow her counsel. We would wait. We would let the weekend pass and face them on Monday. That decision condemned me to the longest and most agonizing weekend of my entire life. The wait was a form of torture. With nothing to do but think, my mind became my own personal prison. My body reacted to the stress, my temperature soared, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, my blood pressure rising with every passing hour. I questioned myself relentlessly, over and over again. So many terrifying thoughts flashed through my mind. I started to doubt my own memory, my own innocence. Is it possible, I asked myself in the dark, to commit a financial crime without even knowing it? Had I overlooked some obscure regulation? This was the beginning of the trauma, the moment the seed of self-doubt was planted, a poison that would fester for years to come. I couldn't wait for Monday morning. The dawn of a new week felt like it held the key to my freedom. I just wanted this whole nightmare to be over so I could return to my normal life, to my wife, my businesses, and the future we were building. The anxiety had kept me awake most of the night, and I was up long before my alarm. I was desperate to get to the EFCC office, present my evidence, and put this ridiculous misunderstanding behind me. Little did I know that the normal life I was so desperate to return to was gone forever. I was standing at the precipice of a new, terrifying reality, and that Monday morning was my first step into it. My new normal would be a world of suspicion, fear, and endless legal battles. When I woke up, I knew I was in no state to drive. My hands were unsteady and my mind was just too preoccupied. I called the manager of my supermarket, a man I trusted, and asked him to come and drive us. He was already aware of the situation, as I had instructed him and the staff not to open the supermarket until this was all sorted out. After he arrived, I kissed my wife goodbye. It was a heavy, uncertain farewell. I promised her I would be back soon, a promise I desperately hoped I could keep. We then drove to my lawyer's residence to pick her up. The three of us then set off for the EFCC's zonal headquarters, a place I never imagined I would ever have cause to visit. This was my first time inside any kind of law enforcement office. My only knowledge of such places came from movies, where tense interrogation scenes played out under harsh lighting. I never, in my wildest dreams, imagined that the reality could be even more tense and intimidating. My lawyer, sensing my growing nervousness, repeatedly told me to relax. "Just be calm," she said. "Tell them the truth about what you do for a living. Show them your documents, it will be fine." I held on to her words like a lifeline, steeling myself for the encounter. I was an open book. I had nothing to hide. I was confident that once they understood my businesses, YouTube, the supermarket, BTV, this would all be cleared up in a matter of hours. As we walked into the reception area, the first thing I noticed were some familiar faces. There were 3 of them, all senior staff from the very banks that had frozen my accounts. They knew me well from my frequent visits and large transactions. I greeted them politely and they nodded back, their expressions unreadable. At that moment, I didn't think much of their presence. After all, this was the EFCC, the agency in charge of financial crimes, and they were bankers. It seemed logical that they would have business here. I was too focused on my own situation to read any deeper meaning into it. I failed to see the threads that were already connecting us all in a web I was about to be caught in. The stage was set, the actors were in place, and I was about to play the lead role in a tragedy I did not write. There was another detail that should have raised a red flag, a glaring conflict of interest that I was too naive to recognize at the time. The lawyer I had brought with me to defend my name, the one who was supposed to be my champion in this fight, also happened to represent one of the big banks that had frozen my account. In fact, as we waited, I saw one of the junior associates from her law firm arrive. He wasn't there for me. He was there with the bankers, carrying a thick file of documents. It was my file. My bank statements, my entire financial life delivered into the hands of my accusers by an associate of my own legal counsel. I had walked into the lion's den, and it seemed my shepherd was working for the lions. I had no idea just how connected it all was. When the interrogation began, the EFCC officials feigned a friendly demeanor. They said they just wanted to get to know me, to understand my business. So I began to explain. I told them about my early struggles with the restaurant, my discovery of YouTube, the viral success, the supermarket, and my new dream, BTV. I laid out my entire journey, providing details and context, believing that transparency was my best defense. But the more I talked, the more questions they asked. Their friendly curiosity slowly morphed into a persistent, circular line of questioning. They seemed perpetually unsatisfied with my answers, circling back to the same points, picking at details. It was exhausting and frustrating. It slowly dawned on me that they weren't seeking to understand. They were fishing. They were looking for a crime to fit the man, not a man to fit a crime. Thinking about it now, I deeply regret saying anything at all. In my innocence, I believed that by explaining everything I could prove I had nothing to hide. But I was wrong. If they had possessed any real incriminating evidence against me, they would have presented it from the start. They had nothing. My detailed explanations only gave them more threads to pull, more avenues to explore in their desperate search for wrongdoing. We were there for over 5 grueling hours. 5 hours of repeating myself, of defending my success, of feeling my life being dissected under a microscope of suspicion. Finally, I was exhausted and fed up. I told them I had answered all their questions and I wanted to go home. That was when the friendly facade shattered completely. This was the moment they brought out a fresh file and a statement form. An officer pushed it towards me and said I needed to write my official statement. He then recited the chilling words you only hear in movies. Anything and everything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. My heart stopped. Whoa, hold on, I stammered, my voice trembling with a mixture of fear and anger. What the hell is going on here? Am I being charged with something? Am I under arrest? The lead investigating officer looked at me with cold, dead eyes. Yes, he said calmly. We are investigating you for fraud and money laundering. My world collapsed in that instant. I was no longer a citizen trying to clear his name. I was a suspect. I was the prey. The investigating officer's words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Fraud and money laundering. The accusation was so ludicrous, so disconnected from my reality, that for a moment, I felt a dizzying sense of unreality, as if I were trapped in someone else's nightmare. But the cold, sterile room and the hard stares of the men in front of me were all too real. The officer then leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone. He said that I would have to cooperate with them, that if I helped them, they could help me. He then dropped the next bombshell. He claimed they had already obtained a court order to remand me in prison, a chilling threat designed to break my spirit before the fight had even begun. I felt the floor drop out from under me, a free fall into sheer terror. Before this supposed trip to prison, however, they had one more stop to make. The officer informed me that they needed to search my house. They were looking for more evidence, he said, as if my guilt was already a foregone conclusion. My blood was boiling. A hot, furious rage mixed with a cold, paralyzing fear. I was speechless, my mind unable to form a coherent thought or protest. All the confidence I had walked in with, all my belief in the power of truth, had evaporated under the heat of their accusations. The officer then produced the thick file of documents I had seen earlier. He casually flipped through my bank statements, the very papers delivered by an associate of my own lawyer. It was at this moment that all the pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. The bank's early morning call, their presence here, my lawyer's firm representing them. It wasn't a series of coincidences, it was a coordinated ambush. They completely isolated me. When I reached for my phone to call my wife or my other lawyer, they snatched it away. I was denied the right to make a single call, cut off from my support system and left completely at their mercy. They bundled me into the back of their van, a stark, impersonal vehicle that reeked of authority. Two officers armed with rifles sat on either side of me, their presence a constant, intimidating reminder of my new status. I was no longer a successful entrepreneur. I was a criminal suspect being transported to a crime scene, my own home. The short drive was a blur of flashing lights and the cold reality of my situation. I looked out the window at the familiar streets of my city, which now seemed alien and hostile. I was being paraded like a common thief, my dignity stripped away with every meter we drove. The humiliation intensified as we approached my house. My mind raced, thinking of my wife. How would she react to seeing me arrive like this, flanked by armed men? What would my neighbors think? I was filled with a profound sense of shame and helplessness. This was the life I had built with my own two hands, through sleepless nights and relentless effort. Now, the very institution meant to protect citizens like me was leading an invasion into my private sanctuary, treating me as if I were the enemy. The righteous anger I had felt earlier was now a smoldering ember, buried under a thick blanket of dread. I was trapped, a pawn in a game whose rules I didn't understand, and it felt like checkmate was just a few moves away. As the EFCC van pulled up to my house, I felt a wave of public shame just wash over me. The sight of the official vehicle and those armed officers immediately drew the attention of my neighbors. Windows opened, curtains were parted, and people started to gather at a distance, their faces a mix of curiosity and suspicion. I was being publicly branded as a criminal before I had even been charged with a crime. This was my home, my sanctuary, and now it was being turned into a spectacle of my disgrace. Before they could drag me inside, a surge of defiance rose within me. I looked the lead officer in the eye and insisted on searching their pockets before they entered my house. I said, "I don't trust you," my voice shaking but firm. "I believe you are trying to frame me." To my surprise, they agreed, maybe just to keep up a thin veneer of procedure. The search of my home was not an investigation, it was a violation. They tore through my life's possessions with a callous disregard for my privacy or property. They turned everything upside down, ransacking drawers, emptying closets, and leaving a trail of chaos in their wake. The most degrading moment came when they went through my wife's personal belongings, callously handling her underwear and private items. It was an act of profound disrespect, a deliberate humiliation designed to break me down completely. I stood there just watching helplessly as they desecrated my home. My lawyer, who had accompanied us, was rendered powerless. She was as shocked as I was, but every time she tried to intervene, the EFCC officers would curtly insist they were acting within their rights, waving their supposed authority like a weapon. The entire time, I was acutely aware of the eyes of my neighbors. I could feel their stares burning into my back. In their minds, the narrative was simple and damning. The successful young man next door was a fraud, and he had finally been busted. The presumption of innocence is a legal theory. In the court of public opinion, the arrival of armed EFCC agents is a verdict of guilt. The shame was suffocating. This was the reputation I had worked so hard to build, and it was being destroyed in a matter of minutes. The humiliation was a deeper wound than any legal charge they could ever bring against me. It was a stain that I feared would never wash away, a public branding that would follow me long after they were gone. After turning my home inside out, they gathered up what they deemed to be evidence. They confiscated my personal documents, business records, and most critically my MacBook Pro. This laptop was my digital brain, containing years of work, personal memories, and the keys to my online businesses. They didn't stop there. They demanded I give them my email password and the login credentials for my YouTube channels. It was a complete digital takeover. With my documents, my computer, and my online identity in their possession, we returned to the EFCC's office. The brief, horrifying excursion was over. They led me not back to the interrogation room, but down a dark hallway to a small, grim cell. The heavy metal door clanged shut behind me, the sound of finality echoing in the darkness. I was officially a prisoner. The darkness of the cell was absolute, broken only by a sliver of light from under the door. The air was thick with the smell of damp concrete, sweat, and despair. This was my world now, a small, cold room that felt like a tomb. The night stretched before me, an eternity of loneliness and terror. Honestly, it was the single most horrifying and depressing moment of my entire life. All the strength and defiance I had mustered during the day just collapsed under the crushing weight of my confinement. Alone with my thoughts, my mind became a torture chamber, replaying the day's events in a relentless, cruel loop. The accusations, the humiliation, the armed guards, the slammed cell door. Each memory was a fresh stab of pain. I spent the best part of that long, dark night questioning God. My faith, which had always been a source of strength, was now a source of agonizing questions. Why? I whispered into the darkness, the words swallowed by the silence. Why is this happening to me? What did I do to deserve this? I had tried to live an honest life, to work hard, to give back. Yet here I was, locked away like a hardened criminal, my life in ruins. It felt like a profound betrayal, not just by the justice system but by the universe itself. This was my darkest hour, a spiritual and emotional abyss from which I wasn't sure I could ever climb out. Every tick of the clock was a reminder of my powerlessness. Sleep was an impossible dream. Even if my racing mind had allowed it, the physical conditions of the cell made sure I remained awake. The concrete slab I was supposed to sleep on was unforgivingly hard and cold, but the real torment came from the mosquitoes. They were a relentless, buzzing swarm, feasting on me throughout the night, their bites a constant, irritating reminder of my miserable surroundings. I felt less than human, just a piece of meat for them to feed on. I slapped at them in the dark, the small acts of violence a futile outlet for the immense rage and frustration building inside me. I longed for the morning not with hope, but with a desperate need for the night's torment to end. I was awake long before the first crow of the rooster. When the first hint of daylight finally appeared, it brought no relief, only the dread of what was to come. At precisely 8 in the morning, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hall, stopping at my cell. The lock turned, and the heavy door creaked open. It was the investigating officer. He looked at me, his face impassive, and simply said, "It's time." They came for me and led me back to the interrogation room for another round of questioning. My body ached, my eyes were gritty from lack of sleep, and my spirit was at its lowest ebb. I was being led back into the fray, exhausted and broken, to face another day of psychological warfare. When I was brought into the interrogation room on that second day, something was immediately different. My lawyer, the woman who had accompanied me the day before, was not there. In her place stood the junior associate from her firm, the same young man who had delivered my bank statements to the EFCC the previous morning. A cold knot of dread tightened in my stomach. Are they all in on this together? I asked myself silently. His presence felt less like legal representation and more like a confirmation of my worst fears. He was not there to defend me. He was a placeholder, a witness for the prosecution disguised as my counsel. I felt utterly and completely alone, a lamb surrounded by a pack of wolves, with my own shepherd standing idly by. The interrogation began almost immediately, but the tone had shifted from the feigned curiosity of the previous day to open hostility. A panel of 4 officers sat across from me, their body language aggressive and intimidating. They bombarded me with questions from all sides, a relentless assault designed to confuse and overwhelm me. They raised their voices, slammed their fists on the table, and accused me of lying. It was a classic good cop, bad cop routine, except all the cops were bad. Through it all, the lawyer from my firm just stood there. He remained silent, a statue in the corner of the room, offering no objections, no counsel, no support whatsoever. He was a spectator at my execution. His passivity was a betrayal far deeper than their aggression. After hours of this relentless pressure, I felt my resolve beginning to crack. I was exhausted, disoriented, and terrified. It was at this moment of peak vulnerability that they made their move. I looked at them, my voice barely a whisper, and asked, "What exactly do you want from me?" One of the officers leaned forward, his eyes glinting. "We want your gang," he said, "and we are going to bring your friends in. If you help us, we will let you out." The words hit me like a slap. Gang? Friends? I was stunned, then filled with a fresh wave of rage. "What have my friends got to do with this?" I yelled, my voice cracking. "I have no gang. This is YouTube, for crying out loud. You don't need a gang to make YouTube videos." I tried to protest, to explain the absurdity of their accusation, but the lawyer guy finally spoke. He didn't defend me. Instead, he simply told me to go along with them. It was a clear signal: cooperate or else. They already had the names of my friends. In my naive attempt to be transparent the day before, I had mentioned my friend who first introduced me to YouTube and helped me start. I felt a wave of nausea and self-loathing. I had been stupid. I had inadvertently dragged my innocent friends into this nightmare. The investigating officer saw my distress and pounced, promising me that they would only ask them a few questions to verify my story. It was a lie. They made the calls, and when my friends arrived, thinking they were coming to help me, they were arrested and locked up too. The trap was now fully sprung, and my friends were caught in it with me. We had all been deceived, manipulated into giving statements without any real legal counsel to protect our rights. The young lawyer, who was supposed to be our shield, had instead facilitated our entrapment. Seeing my friends locked in a cell because of me was a new level of agony. The guilt was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I had to do something. I finally managed to get a message out, calling for my dad to come as soon as he could. His arrival brought a small flicker of hope into the suffocating darkness of the EFCC office. We immediately started fighting for bail, but every attempt was met with a firm rejection. The investigating officer relayed a chilling message from his boss, the zonal head of the agency. He told my lawyer and my father that the zonal head was personally invested in my case and was ready to teach me a lesson. A lesson for what? To this day, I still do not know. Was it for being young and successful? For daring to move large, legitimate sums of money? Or was it simply because they could? This personal vendetta made it clear that this was no longer about a routine investigation. It had become a power play, and I was the pawn they intended to sacrifice. The system wasn't just broken, it felt malevolent, actively working to crush me. On the third day of my detention, a familiar face appeared. It was my first lawyer, the one who had wisely advised me against going to the EFCC's office on that fateful Friday. He had heard about my arrest and came to see me. I narrated everything that had transpired. The interrogation, the search, the arrest of my friends, and the betrayal by the second lawyer's firm. He listened, his face growing grim. He confirmed my suspicions, telling me bluntly that I was being manipulated and that these guys were clearly up to something sinister. It was at that moment we made a critical decision. I would no longer engage in any conversation or answer any more of their questions. I would pretend to play along with the lawyer who was working with the bank, but secretly my real legal strategy would now be directed by my first, trusted counsel. We immediately filed another motion for bail, but once again, it was denied by the zonal head. The situation felt hopeless. But behind the scenes, my family and my lawyer were working tirelessly, reaching out to anyone who would listen. They pleaded my case, pulling strings and calling in favors from highly placed people who could apply pressure from above. Finally, on the fourth day, after immense effort and intervention, our bail was granted. The moment I stepped out of that building and into the fresh air, I felt a profound sense of relief, but it was tainted with the trauma of the past 4 days. The fight was far from over. It was just the beginning. But for now, I was free. Walking out of the EFCC's office after 4 days felt like being reborn into a world that had lost its color. The sun seemed too bright, the air too thin. When I finally got home, the moment I saw my wife, the facade of strength I had maintained crumbled completely. I broke down and cried like a baby, releasing all the pent-up fear, humiliation, and despair from the preceding days. Those 4 days spent in a cold, dark cell had felt like an eternity in hell. My mind was a chaotic landscape of painful thoughts. I couldn't stop thinking about my friends, wondering what they must be feeling towards me. I had unintentionally led them into a lion's den, and the guilt was a heavy, suffocating blanket I couldn't shake off. The pain of imagining their betrayal was almost as sharp as the ordeal itself. My newfound freedom was fragile, a temporary reprieve rather than a true release. The intimidation from the EFCC did not stop with my bail. It continued relentlessly, a form of psychological torture designed to keep me off balance. Their agents would call me at odd hours of the night, summoning me back to their office for more questioning. They would ask the same things I had already told them, over and over again, a deliberate tactic to wear me down. Each phone call sent a jolt of anxiety through my body, a constant reminder that I was still under their thumb, that they could snatch away my liberty at any moment. I was a prisoner in my own home, haunted by the ringing of my phone. In a moment of desperation, I reached out to the lawyer who had accompanied me on that first day, the one whose associate had stood by while I was interrogated. I wanted to understand what was happening, to complain about the harassment. Her response was chillingly indifferent. She sounded bored, as if I were a minor inconvenience disturbing her day. When I tried to express my dissatisfaction with how her associate had handled the intense interrogations, her disinterest turned into outright hostility. She flared up, her voice sharp and defensive, cutting me off before I could even finish my sentence. Her reaction confirmed my deepest fears about where her true loyalties lay. Then, she said something that I will never forget, a statement that exposed the rotten core of the situation. "I'm only trying to help you," she said, her voice dripping with scorn. "After all, I didn't know you were making all these huge sums of money, or I would have befriended you if you had told me everything." I was stunned into silence. The implication was sickeningly clear. Her concern was not for justice or my rights but for my wealth. I finally found my voice. "Excuse me, if I had told you everything, whose side are you on? Do you really think I committed those crimes?" It was at this moment that the intricate web of betrayal came into sharp focus. I asked myself quietly, what have I gotten myself into? As the lawyer continued her tirade, her words became a blur of self-serving justifications. My mind was racing, connecting the dots of the past few days. The bank's call, their presence at the EFCC office, her firm's dual representation, her associates' passivity, and now, this venomous, money-obsessed outburst. It was all one big, ugly picture. I was not just fighting a rogue government agency, I was fighting a conspiracy in which my own legal counsel was a key player. I felt a profound sense of foolishness for ever trusting her. When I couldn't take her voice for another second, I ended the call abruptly. My hands were shaking, not with fear this time, but with a cold, hard rage. The feeling of being a victim was beginning to burn away, leaving behind a desire for retribution. The first person I called was my brother. "Bro," I said, my voice low and urgent, "we're on our own. We need a new lawyer, a real one." The betrayal had severed my last ties to the naive belief that the system would correct itself. It was clear now that I had to build my own defenses from the ground up, with people I could trust implicitly. But even as I was making this call, plotting my next move, my other phone rang. It was the EFCC again. The officer on the line informed me that they now wanted to bring my wife in for questioning. That was the final straw. The thought of them subjecting her to the same humiliation and intimidation they had put me through was unbearable. "It's not happening," I shouted into the phone, all pretense of cooperation gone. "What more do you want from me?" I told the officer in no uncertain terms that there was no way I would allow my wife to set foot in their office, especially on a Friday, knowing their tactics. "If you can't wait until Monday, then you should come and arrest me right now." I was done being scared. I was done being polite. I was ready to fight. I hung up the phone, my heart pounding with a mixture of terror and defiance. I knew I had just escalated the situation, but I would do anything to protect my family from this nightmare. They had crossed a line, and in doing so, they had awakened a part of me I didn't know existed. My next call was to my first lawyer, the man who had fought to get me out on bail. I swallowed my pride and apologized profusely for not listening to his initial advice. I explained the latest threat against my wife and the betrayal by the other lawyer. "I need you to get me and my wife out of this house now," I pleaded. I felt threatened in my own home. These men had shown they would stop at nothing. They had paraded me through my neighborhood with guns like I was a dangerous criminal. The town no longer felt safe. We decided to go into hiding for a few days to find a safe place where we could think and plan our counterattack. I was tired of playing defense. It was time to go on the offensive. We spent the weekend in hiding, a self-imposed exile in our own state. Those 3 days were a crucible of strategy and resolve. Away from the immediate threat of a knock on the door, we started to plot our response. The fear was still there, a constant hum beneath the surface, but it was now overlaid with a steely determination. I was no longer just a suspect trying to clear his name. I was a fighter preparing for war. The weekend passed in a blur of intense discussions with my lawyer. When Monday morning arrived, I took a deep breath and drove my wife to the EFCC's office myself. We would face them, but on our own terms. She calmly corroborated everything I had told them, put down her statement, and we left. We had met their demand, but the game had changed. As the week rolled on with no end to the harassment in sight, I made a pivotal decision. I called my lawyer and said the words that would define the next 3 years of my life. If they won't take me to court, I will take them to court. The idea was born out of sheer frustration. I was tired of being in limbo, my life held hostage by their endless investigation. If they had a case against me, they should charge me. If they didn't, they should release my properties and leave me alone. Since they refused to do either, I would force their hand. I would drag them into the light of a courtroom where their actions would be scrutinized by an impartial judge. It was a massive gamble, but it was better than slowly suffocating in a state of perpetual uncertainty. This was the beginning of our lawsuit. We filed a fundamental human rights enforcement suit against the EFCCC, but we didn't stop there. We also sued the 3 giant banks that had colluded with them, the institutions that had frozen my accounts without a valid court order, and handed over my private financial data. The moment the lawsuit was served, the atmosphere at the EFCC zonal headquarters turned even more hostile. On my next visit, the zonal head gave me a look that could freeze fire, a look of pure animosity. He was a man whose authority had been challenged, and it was clear he would not forget it. My lawyer asked him directly, What else do you need before you can release his properties, since you are not charging him to court? His reply was a masterclass in bureaucratic arrogance and impunity. We are still investigating, he said with a dismissive wave of his hand. He then added that they would take their time and do whatever they wanted to do. His message was clear: my lawsuit meant nothing to him. He believed he was above the law. I had hoped that filing the case would be a quick, decisive move that would bring a swift resolution. I was in for the shock of my life. I had just stepped onto a new battlefield, one governed by arcane procedures and endless delays. The fight for my freedom was about to become a grueling war of attrition, a marathon of adjournments and legal maneuvering that would test my endurance to its absolute limit. As the court case began, the EFCC laid out their defense. It was as ridiculous as it was insulting. They told the court that I was making a lot of money and that I couldn't possibly defend its source. According to their argument, my age and the volume of transactions in my bank accounts were inherently suspicious. My youth and my success were presented as prima facie evidence of criminality. It was a preposterous claim, yet they stated it with the full authority of a federal agency. But that wasn't the part that truly enraged me. The real betrayal came from one of my own banks. Their lawyers stood before the judge and declared that the EFCC was right to have flagged my accounts. They stated that they too felt my financial activities were suspicious, and that the burden was on me to prove I wasn't a fraudster. I sat in the courtroom listening to the institution I had entrusted with my money publicly validate the nightmare that had consumed my life. I was burning with a silent, helpless rage. My own bank was actively working against me, siding with my accusers to protect themselves. I wanted to stand up and scream, to tell the judge the whole sordid story, but my lawyer kept a firm hand on my arm, whispering for me to remain calm and silent. After each court hearing, my phone would ring. It would be well-meaning friends or distant acquaintances, all offering the same unsolicited advice. Don't go against the system. You can't win. They will crush you. It will drain you financially and emotionally. But I refused to back down. This was no longer just about my money. It was about my name, my honor, and my refusal to be bullied into submission. During these incredibly tough times when I felt isolated and under siege, a new set of players emerged from the woodwork, cunning opportunists who tried to take advantage of my desperation. The first was an agent from the very EFCC office that was prosecuting me. He paid a visit to my house, acting like a concerned friend, and strongly advised me to settle the case out of court. He painted a grim picture, insisting there was no way I could ever win a lawsuit against them. I listened to his counsel with a passive expression, thanked him for his concern, and showed him the door. I knew he was not there to help me. He was there to intimidate me into surrender. The next approach was even more shocking and bizarre. I was contacted by a man who introduced himself as a pastor. He claimed to have high-level connections, people who could talk to the EFCC zonal head and force his hand to drop the case. All I had to do, he explained, was to tip the zonal head with a significant portion of my frozen funds as a gesture of appreciation. I stared at him in disbelief. A supposed man of God was advising me to pay a bribe, to become the very thing they had falsely accused me of being. I asked him if he, a pastor, was seriously telling me to bribe a government official. He smiled and said it wasn't a bribe, merely an appreciation. The vultures were circling, smelling blood in the water. The constant pressure from all sides began to take its toll. The pastor's offer, as corrupt as it was, planted a seed of doubt in my weary mind. I called my lawyer, my voice heavy with the weight of the struggle. "Are you absolutely sure we can win this thing?" I asked him, needing reassurance. His response was firm and unwavering. "Yes," he said, "we will win, unless there is something you have been hiding from me." I recounted the strange visits and calls I had been receiving, the EFCC agent, the pastor, and the growing sense that my case had become a topic of interest for all the wrong people. I didn't want this attention. He promised he would deal with it, to shield me from these opportunistic vultures. But the very next day, the circle widened. I received a call from a man who claimed to be a senior official at the EFCC headquarters in Abuja. He said my case file had landed on his desk and that he was one of the people tasked with analyzing the contents of my seized laptop. He got straight to the point. He wanted to negotiate. He asked what I would be willing to offer them to make the entire case disappear, to get my accounts unfrozen and my properties returned. The price he quoted was $5,000. I let out a short, bitter laugh. I asked him if he was aware that I had already filed a lawsuit and that the case was currently being heard in a federal high court. "We'll take care of that," he said smoothly, "once we agree on a fee." That was all I needed to hear. "Shove your offer up your ass. I told him curtly. "I will never give you a single dime." The back and forth in court dragged on for 3 brutal months. It was a slow, grueling process of filings, motions, and adjournments. But finally, the day came when the judge was ready to deliver her judgment. I sat in the courtroom, my heart pounding in my chest, my entire future hanging in the balance. The case was a fundamental human rights violation suit, and as the judge began to speak, a wave of relief washed over me. She sided with me. She methodically dismantled the EFCC's case, ruling that they had no legal right to freeze my accounts or seize my property without a valid court order from a competent court. The judge was scathing in her assessment. She stated that based on all the arguments they had presented, no judge in their right mind would have ever granted them such an order in the first place. Their entire case, she concluded, was built on nothing more than suspicion and prejudice. There was no evidence to suggest a crime had been committed other than the crime of me being too young to be wealthy. She ordered the EFCC to immediately unfreeze my accounts and release all my confiscated properties. She also awarded damages against them and the banks for their unlawful actions. I felt a surge of elation. After 3 months of hell, I had won. Justice had prevailed. Little did I know, the war was far from over. I had only won the first battle. The judge's verdict felt like the sun breaking through a storm. I felt vindicated, honestly, and reborn. The weight that had been crushing my spirit for 3 long months was suddenly lifted. I had taken on a giant and won. The court had affirmed what I knew all along. I was innocent. I had gotten justice, or so I thought. The happiness was pure and overwhelming. I walked out of the courthouse feeling 10 feet tall, ready to finally close this dark chapter and reclaim my life. However, the echoes of that victory quickly became distorted, twisted by rumor and speculation. The news of my win spread like wildfire, but the story changed with each telling, growing more and more fantastical. Soon, rumors began to circulate that I had not just won a case but had been awarded a colossal sum of money. The figure that people settled on was 100 million Naira. It was an absurd, baseless number, but it captured the public's imagination. Friends and strangers alike started looking at me differently, not as a man who had fought for his rights, but as a lottery winner. One day my phone rang. It was an acquaintance, someone I barely knew. He congratulated me on my win and then, without a hint of shame, asked for his share of the money. He wanted to know when the funds would be dispersed and what my investment plans were. I was, speechless. I didn't say a word, I just gently ended the call. The incident, though comical on the surface, sent a chill down my spine. The rumor was not just an annoyance, it was a danger. It made me a target. I turned to my wife, my heart heavy with a new kind of fear. "Babe," I said, "we are leaving this town." The victory I had fought so hard for had ironically made my home unsafe. I was terrified that someone, believing the 100 million Naira lie, would break into our house hoping to find a fortune that didn't exist. My family's safety was now at risk, not from the EFCC, but from the distorted perception of my victory. The legal fees for the high court case were substantial. They were a significant drain on my resources, but I considered it the price of freedom. My relationship with my lawyer was strong and he was very fair with his billing, for which I was grateful. I cannot disclose the exact amount, but it was a heavy cost. We started making quiet preparations to relocate to escape the rumors and the unwanted attention. The joy of the court victory was already being overshadowed by a cloud of anxiety. I had won the legal battle, but I was now facing a new fight. A battle against a lie that was more dangerous than the truth had ever been. In the days following the judgment, the banks that had so readily thrown me under the bus were suddenly eager to make amends. Their senior managers called me personally, their voices filled with a synthetic corporate apology. They insisted that they were only following orders from the EFCC, that they had to do what was necessary to protect their own institution. It was, honestly, a cowardly excuse, a transparent attempt to absolve themselves of their role in my ordeal. After finally unfreezing my accounts, they had the audacity to plead with me, asking if we could negotiate a lower payment for the damages awarded by the court. I refused to even engage with them. My only reply was, "Speak to my lawyer." The experience had taught me a harsh but valuable lesson about the nature of business. Every professional relationship is exactly that, a business relationship. Loyalty is often a commodity, traded for profit and self-preservation. You must always protect yourself, and that means always having your lawyer by your side. You cannot rely on handshakes, personal relationships, or the supposed integrity of large institutions. I had learned this lesson in the most painful way possible. The betrayal by my bank and my first female lawyer had carved this truth into my soul. From now on, every interaction, every contract, every negotiation would be viewed through a lens of cautious skepticism. Just as things seemed to be settling down, just as I was beginning to breathe again, the ground shifted beneath my feet once more. I received a call from my lawyer. His voice was grim. He informed me that I had been summoned to appear before the Court of Appeal. The EFCC and all three banks were not accepting the High Court's judgment. They were disputing the verdict, appealing the decision, and challenging the damages awarded. The fight was not over. The giant I thought I had slain was getting back up for another round. A wave of profound frustration and exhaustion washed over me. The news of the appeal was a crushing blow. The financial relief I was supposed to receive from the damages was now frozen, pending the outcome of a new, even more protracted legal battle. Worse still, I would now have to spend even more money to defend the judgment I had already won. The thought was sickening. I began to seriously question my decision to go to court in the first place. Was it worth it? This endless cycle of litigation was becoming a new kind of prison, one with invisible bars of legal fees, emotional turmoil, and perpetual uncertainty. I had escaped the EFCC's cell only to find myself trapped in the labyrinth of the appellate court system. The appeal process was a slow, grinding marathon that seemed to have no finish line. The case dragged on, stretching from 2019 all the way to July of 2022. 3 more years of my life were consumed by the legal system. Each new filing, each motion, each court appearance was another drain on my already depleted resources. While the legal battle raged on, my personal life was also undergoing significant changes. My wife had given birth to our beautiful baby, a joyous event that was sadly shadowed by our ongoing struggles. The added cost of raising a child, combined with the expense of relocating and settling into a new city, put an immense strain on our finances. I was being bled dry from all directions. My professional life, which had been the source of this whole ordeal, was crumbling. While I was physically and mentally consumed by the court case, my businesses were being neglected. My last remaining YouTube channel, the one I had tried to maintain through the chaos, was taken down. I don't know if it was a direct result of the case, but the timing felt suspicious. My supermarket, once a thriving enterprise, began to falter. Without my direct oversight and with no funds to reinvest, it couldn't keep up with the competition. I was watching everything I had built slowly disintegrate, and I was powerless to stop it. I was fighting for my name in court, but losing my livelihood in the process. The appeal process was a different kind of music, a somber, discordant tune of financial ruin. The first case was over, and I had technically won. I had my properties released, but the victory felt hollow. I was dancing to a new rhythm now, one dictated by the constant piling up of legal bills and the shrinking of my bank balance. The fight against a corrupt system was proving to be ruinously expensive. My decision to fight back, born of principle and a desire for justice, was having devastating real-world consequences. I was winning in court but losing in life. Finally, after 3 long years, the appeal court justices were ready to deliver their judgment. They upheld the fundamental decision of the High Court, once again affirming that the EFCC and the banks had acted unlawfully. It was another vindication, another moment of legal victory. But then came the caveat, the final twist of the knife. While they agreed with the verdict, they decided to slash the damages awarded by the High Court by a staggering 75%. I sat there in stunned silence, the news washing over me like a cold gray wave. The long-awaited closure had arrived, but it came with a bitter price tag. The reduced sum awarded by the appeal court would not even cover half of the money I had spent over the last 41 months pursuing this case. It was a pittance, honestly, an insult. I wept silently in the courtroom, not tears of joy or relief, but of profound, heartbreaking loss. Yes, I had received another favorable judgment. Yes, I was happy that this marathon legal battle was finally, truly coming to an end. And yes, a part of me was glad that I would finally have some form of closure, a chance to find some semblance of peace. But the practical reality was devastating. How was I supposed to pay the mountain of bills I had accumulated? How could I rebuild a life from the ashes with this paltry sum? This story is incredibly important to me, not because I ultimately won the war in the eyes of the law, but because I lost so much in the battles along the way. I lost my primary business, the supermarket closed down permanently, unable to survive the years of financial neglect. I lost my peace of mind. For years I woke up every day with the gnawing feeling that someone was watching me, waiting for another chance to pounce. The paranoia became a permanent resident in my mind, a ghost that followed me everywhere. The stress and anxiety were constant companions. The toll on my relationships was immense. I lost friendships, not through any dramatic falling out, but through a slow erosion caused by my own withdrawal. The case consumed me so completely that I had little energy left for anyone else. My mental health deteriorated significantly. I was constantly on edge, irritable, and sinking into a depression that felt impossible to escape. And to cap it all off, I lost the very thing that had started it all. The source of the money that brought all this unwanted attention. My YouTube presence was gone. It wasn't YouTube's fault, but a part of me, irrationally, wants to blame the EFCC for all of it. They didn't just freeze my accounts, they froze my life. So, what happens next? Do I take this to the Supreme Court, to spend more years and more money I don't have, chasing a more just penalty for these agents of impunity? Did I truly get justice? The law says yes, but my life says no. The officers who orchestrated this torment, who abused their power and violated my rights, are still out there, holding their positions, free to do this to someone else. So, if you ask me whether I feel relieved, I honestly don't have an answer. This victory feels more like a scar than a trophy, a permanent reminder of the price of fighting for justice in a system that makes it almost impossible to win. So, what is the final chapter of this story? The legal battles are over, the judgments have been passed, but the question of what comes next hangs heavy in the air. People ask if I will take this fight to the Supreme Court. They wonder if a higher court might impose a bigger penalty for the flagrant impunity demonstrated by these law enforcement agents. A penalty that might actually serve as a deterrent. It is a logical question, but it fails to account for the human cost. The thought of initiating another legal process, of diving back into that world of endless filings, delays, and exorbitant fees, is physically nauseating. I have given 41 months of my life to this fight. I am not sure I have any more to give. The most persistent question that haunts my quiet moments is this: did I even get justice? The courts gave me a verdict, a piece of paper that says I was wronged. But does that piece of paper equate to justice? The agents who targeted me, who violated my home, who humiliated me and destroyed my peace of mind, are still in their positions. They continue to draw a salary from the state, wielding the same power they so casually abused against me. They have faced no personal consequences for their actions. They are free to ruin another young entrepreneur's life tomorrow, armed with the knowledge that the system will protect them. True justice for me would mean accountability. And in this story, accountability is the one thing that remains glaringly absent. So, if you were to ask me today if I feel relieved, I honestly could not give you a straight answer. There are moments of relief, yes, fleeting moments when I realize I no longer have to prepare for a court date. But this relief is quickly overshadowed by the deep, lingering sense of loss. The legal victory feels abstract, a theoretical win in a system of justice. The losses, however, are painfully real. They are the closed doors of my supermarket, the empty balance in my bank account, the friendships that have faded, and the constant, low-grade anxiety that has become my new normal. The victory is a scar, not a trophy. This journey has fundamentally reshaped my understanding of the world. I once believed in the simple binary of right and wrong and the idea that truth would always prevail. I have learned that the reality is far more complex and far more cruel. Justice is not a right, it is a commodity, an expensive and elusive one that few can afford to pursue to its end. The system is not designed to find the truth, it is designed to perpetuate itself. I survived the EFCC, but I am not the same man who walked into their office on that Monday morning. A part of my innocence, my trust in the world died in that interrogation room, and I don't think I can ever get it back. Sharing this story has been one of the most difficult things I have ever done. Reliving the trauma, the fear, and the betrayal has been a painful process. Yet I felt compelled to speak out, not for my own sake, but for the sake of every other young Nigerian who is trying to build a legitimate life. My experience is not an isolated incident, it is a symptom of a much deeper disease within our system, a culture of impunity and a terrifying lack of accountability. When a state agency can operate with such unchecked power, it becomes a threat to the very citizens it is meant to serve. This is why I wanted to start this conversation, to shine a light into the dark corners of institutional power. We, as a nation, must demand more than just apologies or token damages after the fact. We need fundamental, systemic reform. There must be robust, independent oversight of agencies like the EFCC. This oversight body should have the power to investigate allegations of misconduct, to discipline officers who abuse their authority, and to ensure that investigations are based on evidence, not on prejudice or personal vendettas. The current system, where the agency seems to police itself, is clearly not working. Without external checks and balances, power will inevitably be abused, and more innocent lives will be caught in the crossfire of so-called investigations. Furthermore, we need to reform the very definition of a suspicious transaction. In a country with a burgeoning youth population and a thriving digital economy, being young and successful should be a source of national pride, not a trigger for a criminal investigation. The current mindset, where wealth in the hands of a young person is automatically presumed to be illicit, is archaic and destructive. It stifles innovation, discourages entrepreneurship, and punishes the very people who are driving the future of our economy. We need a system that can distinguish between legitimate enterprise and actual financial crime, rather than casting a wide, lazy net of suspicion over an entire generation. This call for reform is not an attack on the EFCC's mandate to fight corruption. That fight is essential. However, the battle against corruption cannot be won by creating another corrupt and unaccountable institution. The methods must be as clean as the intended outcome. True justice requires a process that is fair, transparent, and respects the fundamental human rights of every citizen. My story is a testament to what happens when we lose sight of that principle. It is a plea to our leaders, our lawmakers, and our fellow citizens to work towards building a system where the guardians of the law are also subject to it. Despite everything I have been through, I refuse to completely give up on hope. I have to believe that a better future is possible. A future where what happened to me does not happen to anyone else. My hope lies not in the institutions themselves but in the power of the people. It lies in our collective ability to demand change, to hold power accountable, and to speak truth even when our voices shake. The #NSARS movement showed us what is possible when we unite for a common cause. That same energy, that same unwavering demand for justice and accountability must be sustained and directed towards all arms of government. My personal journey of healing is ongoing. I am trying to rebuild my life from the ground up to find a new sense of purpose and peace. It is a slow and difficult process filled with setbacks and moments of despair. The financial losses have been catastrophic, but the psychological scars run even deeper. The trust that was broken will take a long time to mend if it ever does fully. But I am a survivor. I survived the interrogations, the cell, the betrayals, and the grueling court battles. I will survive the aftermath. My spirit, though battered and bruised, is not broken. I hope that my story serves as a cautionary tale, not to discourage young entrepreneurs, but to arm them with knowledge. Be diligent, be transparent, but also be prepared. Understand your rights. Have a good lawyer on standby before you ever need one. Document everything. Do not be naive as I was. Do not believe that your innocence alone is enough to protect you. In the world we live in, you must be both a creator and a warrior, ready to build your dreams while also being prepared to defend them fiercely against those who would seek to tear them down. Ultimately, this is the end of my story, at least for now. I am closing this chapter, not with a sense of triumph but with a quiet sense of resolve. I have told my truth, and I now release it into the world. I truly hope that it resonates, that it sparks the conversations we so desperately need to have, and that it contributes in some small way to building a more just and equitable Nigeria for the generations to come. Thank you for listening, for bearing witness to my ordeal, and for allowing me to share the weight of this burden. Your attention is the first step towards the change we all seek.